This interview with Sweet Billy Pilgrim is brought to you by Make a Difference with Records. We're a second-hand vinyl and CD store based in Godalming, Surrey, and support the mental health charity Catalyst. This interview was recorded towards the end of 2022, around the time of the release of Sweet Billy Pilgrim's most recent album, Semapolis. It is part one of a two-part audio and video podcast.
My name's Anthony from Make a Difference with Records, and I'm here today in sunny, well, it's actually not very sunny, it's a bit sunny Aylesbury, with Tim and Jana, who of course are Sweet Billy Pilgrim. Guys, thank you for inviting me along.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolute pleasure.
So, it's funny, I talk to people about Sweet Billy Pilgrim quite a bit, particularly when they come in our second-hand vinyl charity store in Godalming, and when I do and I introduce you to people who've never heard of you, they always say to me, well, what kind of style, what kind of genre is it? And it's invariably at that point where I kind of take a bit of a pause. I go, well, and then I kind of stop and say, look, I'll send you a playlist. Because I kind of find myself in, particularly, the changes over the years, find it very difficult to describe you in any sensible or coherent way. How would you describe your style?
Yeah.
Quite similar to your response, to be honest.
Yeah, neither sensible nor coherent.
No, yeah.
No, it's been the it's kind of been the bane of our existence.
And sometimes a backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
We've been described as genre-defying.
Yeah. I think our drummer called us thrash pastel because it was meaningless. And we're basically slaves to our obsessions.
And what does that mean?
So, whatever we're obsessing about at the time we make a record is the sound of the record, becomes the sound of the record. So, we did an album called Motorcade Amnesiacs, where we were all listening to a ton of guitar bands and riffs, and so we went back to the electric guitar, and then kind of the rest of the band sort of left, so we decided to make an acoustic record, so we get to kind of exercise our Americana sort of muscle with Wap and Tack.
And really just focused on voices, and that was that's what the obsession was there, wasn't it? It was basically listening to all this Emmylou and Graham Parsons and that kind of stuff, and just sort of channeling that. That thing. So it is
kind of previous to that. I was obsessed with sort of people who used found sounds in recordings. So going out with my mini disc player, that dates us rather, and recording the sound of a hammer against a banister going up in the fire escape of an old building, and trying to build our own little sound world. So it's all of the records have been based on a different obsession, and so different things have come to the fore, whether that's guitar riffs or strange noises.
But I think they all leave an echo, so before I was in the band, that was when I was listening to Twice More Men, I genuinely didn't know how these sounds were created. I just thought this sounds magical and mystical. I don't really understand what's happening.
Well,
but I knew that
shed,
I loved
wasn't
it. Yeah.
A lot of it.
But I think even though, there is a sort of a lily pad hopping of obsession to obsession, I think each thing kind of leaves a little echo as it goes along.
Yeah. I mean, the hope is, as an artist, that you imprint everything with, something personal and meaningful and recognisable. And I've kind of got this theory that genre is a dying thing, and I'm kind of pleased because it's I teach songwriting as a sort of job, and it's something my students are less and less concerned with.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you do? Well, I make music, I write songs, and people who listen to music generally don't care.
I mean, genre in a sense is quite restrictive, isn't it? Because once you say, well, I'm prog rock or I'm folk, that kind of ring fences you.
And I wonder if that emanates from a need, out of a sort of a need to compartmentalize, to make sense of the world, to know where to focus your interests and what to discard, and I think a lot of times. I think we do, and I think a lot of people do. Anybody who creates any kind of art is probably trying to fight against that need to, because what it means is it excludes other things that may that may also be you want to include in how you see the world or how you use your creativity.
And also, I think creativity is kind of rightly so an act of rebelling, and so kind of kicking against those things. Where we're, what kind of music are you? Well, we're this. Like 10 minutes after that, I always want to be something entirely different at the opposite end of the spectrum. I really want to make a hip hop record. Have I mentioned this to you?
You have mentioned this quite a few times.
So at some point...
There's not much nodding going on there, Tim.
No. this might be a conversation for another time. But like, and I also want to make a metal record, which, we've kind of dipped a toe in that a bit. And I'm just fascinated by how it all works. So like, if I say we're a prog band, or if I say we're a kind of folk band or folktronica, or it means it's very difficult to kind of...
dismiss.
Yeah, it's once you're there, people, and then you make a record that's not that. People get confused and sometimes angry. And it seems to be like more about making the industry comfortable, and
it becomes a product in a sense, doesn't it? Because people expect that, as opposed to a development and a creation.
And it's the thing of, it doesn't sound anything like your last record, I'm really angry now, or it sounds exactly like your last record, there's no development, I'm really angry now. So we're kind of stuck. It's between a rock and a hard place, so you've just got to kind of trust your instincts. Or I'll just trust your instincts. That seems a much better idea.
So we've talked about the fact that you don't want to be, and in fact probably aren't defined by one particular genre, but listening to all the albums as a fan, there seems to be this core that goes through them. Now there's an obvious link in the sense that your voice or voices now are constant presences, but there are echoes, for my part, echoes through each album where you go, that's very much Sweet Billy Pilgrim, however much you change. What would you say that core is? What are the constants amongst everything else that changes?
Well, I have a slightly sideways perspective, I suppose, because I was a fan of the band and then in the band, and so there's a part of my brain that is still that. So I observe how you think and how you create music as sort of both a fan and a participant. So I think that it is a sort of restless curiosity and a kind of a deep dive, basically, into I think a deep dive into personal experiences, but also kind of more existential experiences that are a bit more general. So I know that's not really an audio specific description, but I feel like that is that emotional thrust goes all the way through, regardless of the changing genre play.
Yeah, I mean, you say it doesn't translate into the audio side. I mean, there's a certain angst in a lot of the tracks, a lot of the records, which maybe is what you're
definitely
describing.
Yeah, I'd say it's there's a vein of melancholy that runs through it all. But I suppose the thing, if I had to kind of isolate the thing that I love in music that would join up all the things that I like, it's usually a moment on a record that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And I suppose what we've tried to do over the years is kind of find what that is, try and find the moment.
So kind of chasing that a little bit, because you do it on stage as well, I think. And when those moments happen, it's like it makes sense of everything else. And so so there is this kind of holy grail search all the time for that moment, that tingly moment.
And it's sometimes it's like 2 or 3 seconds of a 7-minute song.
But worth the wait.
I always think it is. It's like, there are moments in my favourite films, and they are only moments, but you'll sit through an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 3.5 hours of a black and white Russian epic for that one bit. Same with horror films, same with,
or the beer and ice cold with Alex,
Yeah, exactly. And, like those moments, and I think, because we were kind of discussing this earlier in I guess in relation to kind of mental health, where you find where you recognise and you sort of recognise the moment that is special, even though it's maybe only there for 2 seconds, and you kind of say out loud to yourself, that just happened, that was important.
Remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that when you're struggling, because I mean, I'll give you an example. John came over earlier in the week to record some vocals.
Yeah.
And then just kind of, sort of, I was going to say accidentally, but it wasn't accidental, but we were all sitting around the dinner table with my son, my wife, and we just sat there for 2 hours after we'd eaten and we chatted. And ordinarily you let those moments go past, and what I'm kind of finding now is that I need to mark those moments.
Yes.
So you get to the end of an evening like that, and I didn't make a big occasion of it, I didn't let fireworks off or anything, but to go, that was really nice, that was special.
Yeah.
And I think art is the same, and I think when you hear something that means something to you, that you connect with, and when you see something or a piece of art, or it's important that you
collect it, you put it in your little satchel,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you take it with you.
Yeah, exactly. You do. Yeah. You carry a little bit of it around with you.
Yeah.
I always come out of a good film feeling a bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, you've talked in one of the sections of your lyric book about the fact that you were contrasting music with poetry. You were talking about the fact that you see very much music as a shared experience. You can go to a gig and everyone's listening to the same song or the same performance, but everyone's reacting slightly differently. Maybe got a slightly different interpretation of what's happening and what the song means. But there's a collective bond being in that moment. So I kind of read that and I thought that's interesting. And I was thinking about both lockdown when gigs didn't happen and the fact that a lot of people listen to music on their own through headphones and that kind of stuff. Outside of the gig environment, how do you feel music connects people in that way that gives them some strength? So you talk, people maybe with some struggles mentally. How does it help in that context, do you think?
I think at a very basic level, especially when you're younger, it's the feeling of being recognised, and as awful as Morrissey has become, for example, there was, for a kid brought up in a village in the home counties, like away from from London and all the things that were happening, and who felt a bit at odds and kind of weird, and sort of to hear someone singing about those feelings meant that I wasn't alone. And if you listen to the rage in a punk rock song or a metal song, and the energy that goes behind that. As someone who can't express anger very well, that is kind of cathartic for me. That feels like, if just by the act of listening to someone else releasing that emotion,
that allows you maybe
to
do the same.
And it's difficult to describe, but I sort of feel what it would be like to make that noise, that roaring, that screaming, that guttural thing. And I don't have to make the noise. Sometimes you have to go and scream into a pillow. But like it's that feeling, like it's physical. I can't really.
It is physical and it's euphoric. It's chemical. It's like it's producing the rage, the sort of by proxy rage produces ends up producing a positive emotion in you. I think because you are, like you say, it's cathartic, and you are. You're getting to, it's like going on roller coasters, you're putting yourself in danger in theoretically a safe space. There are boundaries to that danger. And I think that that's a similar thing emotionally. There are, it's an imagined world. So you are experiencing trauma, anger, a whole range of emotions, but in a space that it's like you've been invited to, and other people feeling the same kind of thing. So,
and in context, you were talking about rage, but I guess if you think about sort of very melancholy, sad songs, similarly, people in a safe space, maybe they don't feel comfortable expressing their thoughts in company, but maybe quiet reflection that allows them to then release some of those pent up feelings and to think it through.
And I think we're all really, we're all storytellers, and I think we're all interpreters as well. And even if you're listening to something that doesn't have that you don't have a literal context for, the fact that that person is expressing it can speak to you on a kind of an ethereal level where you may not have, the words may not exactly chime with you. Somebody's talking about a specific, I don't know, growing up in Boston or something. You don't have that experience, but their desire to say it or their desire to comment upon it is the thing that you are identifying with as well. And so you can go, somebody, from a different time or in a completely different world has the same impetus feeling that I have. And that's, I think that's an amazing...
Well, like a really good example of that is Born to Run, which I was listening to the other day, Bruce Springsteen, because, that is so far removed from my experience of life, believe it or not. He says, sitting in a cardigan in the home counties. But whenever I'm listening to that song, I totally understand the energy.
And
the desperation and the need to escape and that high emotion that most of the time we have to kind of numb out because it's impractical and if we lived like that we'd be exhausted all the time. But it's permission to not be numb.
Fast Car by Tracy Chapman popped into my head when you were talking about Born to Run. It's a similar kind of the raw emotion in that and the need in that, really.
And kind of and delivered at a whisper. So in comparison to the kind of the Bruce Springsteen roaring at the sky.
Very different way, but maybe
but the same.
Similar result. So we talked about the fact that the musical genre, if I can call it a genre, of a particular album is influenced by what you're listening to at the time and what you're hearing, and maybe to some extent how you're feeling. In terms of the lyrical side, I know, Tim, in particular for you, you've talked about the lyrics being some of the hardest bits for you to get right. And I was just going to ask you, is the lyrical side very difficult for you because you're a perfectionist or because you're looking for that feeling in the same way you're looking for that feeling in the music, and therefore it's quite difficult just to pinpoint it?
I think it's finding the best way to say the thing you mean, and that might not be the most straightforward way. There's the whole show don't tell. It's not really a rule, but I think it opens up more meanings for people to interpret in their own way. I don't like lyrics that tell me exactly what the person is feeling. I like it to be a little bit open so that I can put myself in the lyric.
I think also the connection that you make between the meaning, the sort of the meaning of the lyric and the sound of the lyric is important as well, because you understand that that there is a musical rhythm to language, and that also elicits responses, and I think that's definitely a part of the process.
And a ton of that actually comes from listening to hip hop and what words are nice to hear. This comes from someone who put the word parentheses,
Milky Radius
in a song, and sometimes there's no excuse. But mostly, when you listen to the words that Marvin Gaye chooses to sing in a song, or Bruce Springsteen chooses to sing in a song, and then you listen to bands that kind of want to mess that up and use awkward words to kind of break up the cadence of whatever's happening. So
to just twist the expectation.
To make it awkward, and that's equally valid as well. It's just the intention. But it's what I've grown to love is incorporating more storytelling, and I think I said. Probably in the book, but that the thing I'm really interested in is finding a poetic way, like to kind of blur the lines between lyrics and poetry. I know that's awful, even as I said out loud, it's making me wince. But the thing I'm most influenced by lyrically would be there's a kind of style of poetry, and there's people like Craig Raine, and I think a guy called Christopher Reed, and Seamus Heaney, and people like that who use sort of extended metaphors. So I mean, an example, and it's not nicked, but the idea is nicked. There's a line, swift flies a comma, and it pauses the sky. So that would be something that you'd...
Is that Shelter of Reeds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of that. The idea behind that is kind of stolen from the kind of Craig Raine school of poetry, where he did this marvellous poem called The Martian Sends a Postcard Home, where it's a Martian explaining to another Martian what is going on planet Earth, and it's all really mundane stuff. It's, what is a toilet, what is a car, what is a dream, but explaining it to someone who has no idea what those things are.
Yes.
So it's sort of childlike, and it's a way of seeing the world anew. So there's a lot of that, and then when Jana joined the band, adding the storytelling that she brought to that idea of lyricism sort of shunted everything forward again. So if I could connect those ideas and turn them into some kind of narrative, rather than being abstract, it became more easily connected to.
So I kind of got the impression, just generally, I think from what I've read and I guess from previous conversations, that the lyrics are very much your baby, but I've got the sense in the last album, Wapentak, and then when we're going to talk about Samapolis, the new album that's about to come out, it feels much more of a collaborative process. It feels much more like the two of you in the lyric side. Since
Motorcade, it's basically everything starts with me and you sitting usually
having conversations
in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And I was going to say smoking fags, but vaping now, obviously. And sitting there for 2 or 3 hours and conceptualising until it starts to fall into place, and then a phrase will come, and then it goes back and forth, and then something else happens, and so it is really over the last three albums. I'd say it's been hugely collaborative.
So Jan, I mean, from that perspective, with the last 2 albums, did you come up with the concept first, or did it develop once you got 2 or 3 songs?
It was like song by song. It's things like Slingshot Grin was basically, I can literally remember us sitting in, I think it was a Starbucks cafe, talking about things unrelated to music and more to do with, because we're confidants with, we spend, we work together, we spend time together, so and I suppose one of the reasons we like working together is because we both suffer from similar anxieties and
verbal diarrhea
and so having those conversations, sometimes one person is stronger than the other person, and that goes back and forth.
Well, we're just
right.
It's yeah. I mean, that's true. But it's a process of figuring out, and so one person follows the thread through, and then eventually loses it. At which point the other one jumps in and goes, I think you mean this.
Exactly. Yeah. So Slingshot Grin arose out of a literal conversation we were having about how we, I guess, dealing with kind of claiming your perceived pain, I guess.
Well, it was kind of it was even simpler than that. It was early onset cynicism.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, absolutely.
Which the album was the theme that runs through the album, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was it was scaring me.
Yeah.
And so as we do, we were talking about that.
Yeah.
And like, what would be the voice that answered that? So there's me looking at the world and everything's terrible and everyone's awful. What would the voice that, what would Jana say to me to drag me out of that?
So you're starting to write the story. The musical side hasn't even come into view at this
No,
point,
not really.
though.
But it's sort of, and then it's also kind of thinking in terms of characters, and so like that, it's foreshadowed where we got to with Samapolis, and it's like the idea of the germs of ideas and thoughts and feelings that we have, and how that can be fleshed out into sort of character positions and conversations that people might have to highlight a particular emotional point or whatever.
But I think I think the music does point us in those directions.
Yeah, well, it did with some apples, definitely.
And I think it's sometimes subconscious. So if you listen to a song like Slingshot Grin, so the bits that I'm singing, you know, where I'm saying everything's terrible, is kind of, it's quite bluesy, and there's a sound of chains.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of chain gang shuffle to it, and a sort of.
And you sing behind the line a lot as well. You sort of behind the beat, so it's.
But the music was there already when we were discussing what the song was about, so it must have suggested something to us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And then the bits that you sing are much more. Well, they're much more, you know, tethered to the beat, but also much happier, and kind of. And then by the end of the song, there's a whole kind of end section that's sort of uplifting and hopefully positive. So it kind of starts off, you know, hugely negative and kind of shuffly and awful and wow, I should be a music critic. And then it kind of ends up joyful. And you know, and it's often why our songs are so long.
It takes us ages to get there.
Talking of long songs and ones that kind of build up to something quite spectacular, you well know, Tim, one of my favourite songs in January is Longstreth. And it's a bit of a selfish question, this. I want to hear a bit about the story behind how that came to be.
Wow.
Is that a big question?
No, it's now you're dealing with Tim's memory.
Yeah, it's a memory question. So it came from we watched a film called, I think it's The Big Picture, which is a Christopher Guest. So it's kind of what Spinal Tap was to heavy metal bands. The Big Picture is the Hollywood.
I'm with you. Yeah.
So it's same director, same team. Kevin Bacon's in it, I think. But the love interest in the film was an actor called Elizabeth Longstreth. And we were watching it, and I was like, she's really good. What you know, you do the Wikipedia, and where's she gone, what's she doing? And she vanished. So like she had the beginning of this career, and it was all shaping up, and it was all looking amazing, and then like she's literally vanished. You can't find her anywhere. She's got no social media presence. She's disappeared in terms of, you know, fame, and you know, I'm sure she's fine and having a wonderful life, and I hope so. But the idea of that kind of piqued my interest as a song title, and a kind of an examination of, you know, what can you know, if your life, if the meaning of your life is your art and your creativity, how do you leave that behind? Because it's a question I've asked myself many times, because it doesn't pay. And the hours are terrible, and it's really hard to keep going. And so for the people who don't, what are they doing? How do they justify it? Are they okay? You know, partly so that I could rehearse it in my head and be okay with it if one day I went, you know what, I'm done. And so it's me exploring that, basically, is the song. So I guess musically, the middle 8 section where it goes super heavy is my raging against the dying of the light, whilst everybody watches slightly embarrassed.
It was one of those moments, and where we were all like, when it was 4 of us were trying to work it out, we were convinced that wasn't going to work. That noisy bit in the middle section.
Oh, it nearly went.
It does.
It really does.
It does.
Yeah.
It's also the reason we could never do it live.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite right, is it? Because you did promise me that you would do it live.
Well, you know,
when you got the band together, Tim.
When we got the band left very soon after that song.
I haven't forgotten, Tim.
Yeah. Okay, pressure's on.
Moving on rapidly.
Oh, now it's been recorded. We say it out loud in front of cameras.
So today was meant to be the launch day of the new album Samapolis, but like every artist, everyone's struggling with getting hold of vinyl capacity. So I think it's going to be another 2 or 3 weeks before that sees the day. I know you hate explaining exactly what things are and what things mean, but just give us a flavour of how the idea came about, what it means, and you know, what are the key themes really in the album?
Well, I would say that it was kind of predictably our lockdown album, like lots of people were engaged with, because, you know, what are we going to do? in this time, and there were a few bits of music, bits and pieces of sort of musical bits and bits of songs that had kind of been discarded from previous stuff and
predated Weapons House.
Yeah, definitely. And what do we do with these? And we started. I guess it was. We kind of had no pressure. We just sort of followed our noses and going, well, let's see what these can become. And that's how it started. And it felt like architecture. It felt like building something bit by bit. And that was, as we were sort of referring to before about how the music can influence the content, that the process of putting it together definitely fed into the ideas behind the songs, like what this was going to be. And it, for me, I happened to be reading a lot and studying a bit about the Renaissance and how cities, Renaissance cities basically dealt with plague, and how they either closed down or didn't, and how what the effect had on the inhabitants. And so that was really interesting to me. And because we weren't in the same room for like probably about a year, roughly, over that time. And so we were just it was all sort of texted, emailed ideas and Zoom calls and stuff, where we were just kind of like, it was actually bizarrely energizing. We just kept coming up with more and more ways to build this thing, and it became a thing, more than making songs quite quickly.
Yeah, we.
So to describe the thing for us, then, what's the story?
Well, you probably have a more succinct answer than I do.
No, I mean, no, it's so I guess the shorthand we used throughout was that it's so it's kind of wings of desire, but instead of angels, there's two songwriters looking out over a city, an imaginary city, and then so it starts off with them, and then it kind of swoops down into the city and the individual stories of the people who live there, and then at the end there's a kind of hymn to the city that the two observers, songwriters, sing. And so we were very early on with the music. I was sending ideas to Jana and saying, basically, what does it sound like?
What is this?
Yeah, what is this? and luckily, it was all suggestive of something. So there's a song called Dead Man Dancing, which sounds like panic, agitation. The last song does sound kind of like a hymn.
Yeah.
There's various examples throughout the album, and they all kind of pointed in a direction. And at some point when we had 5 or 6 ideas, I just said to Jana, using your immense acting skills and storytelling, can you just put them in an order? Like without any lyrics. We hadn't written any lyrics.
Yeah.
And so you did that, and the order stayed the same throughout.
Yeah, and bizarrely, like I was basically going about my life, my very solitary life at that point, walking in the woods and lots and lots of walking, just listening to the songs, kind of trying to just let the music tell me a story, what they were suggestive of, and then like you said, then trying to put that in some kind of narrative order without words. And that was super fun and really interesting, because it was that thing about being an interpreter. I was obviously making up whatever story I thought was interesting, and whether that would translate to others, I don't know, but I suppose that's how everything works. Somebody makes something up.
You realised you had at least a story in what I guess in the prog world you'd call a concept album,
definitely,
relatively early on in the process.
I would say so. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say that with all the records, really. They, there's generally a theme that emerges that we kind of stick to, but we'd never done it in the way, we'd never made the decision quite so early on.
Yeah.
And then left the lyrics until so late in the process.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
So previously it was kind of, you write the song, you write the lyrics, you write the song, you write the lyrics. This one was, all the music was written and all the lyrics happened at the end. So that we could keep the continuity and the feeling and the things that we'd invested in the story kind of fresh and connected, and so there was and it was really, really hard, because it was a ton of work all at the end.
Yeah.
The hardest bit.
Yeah.
Sort of stretched out over, and so yeah. I mean, that it was kind of testament to our, at least our staying power, if not our skills.
So it's interesting you saying that you kind of started with the music and that therefore kind of suggested to you the stories that the album tells. I mean, obviously the lyrics leave it open to interpretation exactly what those individual stories are, but I think it's fair to say that it's suggestive of individuals who are kind of slightly down on their luck, maybe suffering loss, trying to make sense of their life. Was that because the music kind of suggested that kind of type of individual? Because there aren't many in there, I guess, seem to be living a very happy existence on the face of it.
I think it's an equation that is comprised of what the music might have suggested and what our default position might be, and also reflective of the time. It was a weird time for everybody, obviously, and I think we just, without really even discussing it, we just naturally felt that this sort of like global anxiety, maybe.
Yeah.
And so it was, I think, all those factors sort of like mixed together. And also the contrast, the music is in so many places way more upbeat than anything we've done before.
Yeah.
And I
almost danceable too. In places.
Yeah, which I definitely did. That was one of the earliest things I pointed out. I can dance to this. But I think I've always liked that. That contrast. One of the reasons I love the Beautiful South is because I love that how some dark stuff can be hidden behind what sounds like playful. If you're not paying attention, it sounds like just light, playful music.
Yeah.
And so I always love that contrast, and I think that also we couldn't help that because that's where our minds go naturally.
And and always creatively, the down on the luck people are much more interesting to write about.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and
it's also puzzle solving.
It's a story that he's telling as well.
Yeah, and also as a human, testing your empathy. I mean, I've led a relatively fortunate life, and I think to explore other lives, I think is an important part of anyone's art.
Yeah.
But it's also similar to what we were talking about as a listener. It's an opportunity to experience and explore feelings that you in a safe space, and I think it's the same. It's no different really as somebody's creating it.
I don't want to be me. Why would I say this to my students all the time? Why do you want to be you all the time?
Yeah.
And also Steely Dan records. Don't need to say much more about that.
Just throw that in there.
Yeah, the way they explore the kind of seedy underbelly of life and the world. It's kind of our version of that, I suppose, is less tongue in cheek, but yeah, I've always been sort of inspired by that. But
it's definitely play acting in the most fulfilling way, where you're experimenting with different mindsets and different experiences, and trying to go deep into them and imagine what it feels like to be somebody experiencing those things, and how that might eventually you go down, and then hopefully that will come up to somebody else, and that might speak to somebody in some way.
Because you get to the end, and then the storytellers are back sort of really observing what they've seen, and then they have this kind of hymn back to the city, I think is the way you've described it. And you get, again, with a lot of your songs, you get this slight ambiguity at that point as to whether it's kind of a hymn to say, just accept your lot, just be resigned to what you have, it is what it is, or whether it's a more positive and uplifting thing that, there is hope, there is a purpose, and that actually things are better.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that conversation about that ending happened right up to the wire in the studio, didn't it? Like we were like, do we come down on one side or the other? Whether there's, what are people hearing at the end? Are they hearing hope or are they hearing resignation? And I think, right up to the end, we're basically going, let's let's just leave that.
Yeah.
Let's just let people
Yeah.
figure it out for themselves what they
Well, I mean,
decide.
and for us as well,
Yeah.
depending on the day,
Yeah.
it meant
Yeah.
different things to us. So I like that. I like the openness.
So plans are what? The album comes out in a few weeks. Probably by the time this interview has come out, it'll be out there for everyone to go and buy. I'm biased because I've lived with it as it's grown. I think it's an amazing album. What are plans to take it on tour, if any?
That's the $1 million. Actually,
Literally.
literally the $1 million question.
You hope.
Well, it's the live thing, because there's only two of us, and we've kind of, and because we spent all the money on making the record, it's especially with the kind of post-lockdown musical world and the changes in the industry and Brexit and blah blah blah, for us to get enough people to make it not karaoke, we're just finding it very difficult to do it, because obviously we want to pay musicians fairly, and all of that stuff. So at the moment, it's we've kind of hit a bit of a.
We are talking to people and trying to semicolon, but we're trying to work out what's the route to playing it live, and it's it may involve tapping into some lovely people's enthusiasm. It may be sort of assessing what the components of the live show will actually be. How far, like you said, we don't want it to be karaoke where we're pressing a button and singing along to it, but there may be some balance to be struck between how much of it we have programmed and how much of it we have played live. So we're sort of trying to work out what the route forward is for that.
And any time frame on it at this point or not?
No, I mean, I think we could tour in March, April, May next year, maybe even, and kind of we're not because we're not a hit chart band. There's no we don't have to connect all these dots in quite the same way that a commercial band would have to. So if it takes us a bit of time to put it together, that's fine. But in the meantime, there's other things we're exploring. We're in the process of creating 11 separate audio dramas, read by actors, relating to the songs. So there's a kind of deeper dive that people can take into the storytelling. So that's anything from like a monologue, someone just reading a story out, to we've got an actual kind of play, which is 10 minutes long. There's two characters and a third sort of narrator, and then sound effects. And so basically we keep finding things to do, and so that's hopefully another way into talking about the record as well, because there are art shows and podcasts and people who we can talk to about the album in a different way.
Yes.
Because I don't think anyone's done it before.
I don't know. But
Maybe.
I think it sort of is suggestive of the kind of there's more of a novelistic feel to it in terms of the ideas that came about, the fact that it's a world and that we kind of are reluctant to leave it just yet. So it's about finding other ways to flesh out and build up that world, and and then I think there's the danger of a best of Sweet Billy Pilgrim, which I think is going to be a kind of giveaway to kind of draw people in with the bonus.
That could divide opinion.
Yeah, I know.
They didn't put that one on. What's that one?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there could be some fighting.
Yeah.
Could be a double. Have to be a double CD, I think.
Yeah, maybe we won't give it away.
Probably not.
But we have also a little bonus track as well that didn't make it onto the album.
Yeah.
Excellent. So if people want to kind of keep in touch with what you guys are up to, and obviously things developing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I mean, we're on all the social media, but if you want to kind of get away from the algorithm, which we're encouraging wholeheartedly, sweetbillypilgrim.com, and then sign up to the mailing list, and we will not send you emails, twice a week. It's sort of 5 or 6 times a year. We're also hoping to return to the internet of 2000, and maybe have a forum. Maybe have a place where people can get together where they're not being directed by Facebook or Twitter in a certain direction. because we've noticed, this sense of community is really, really important.
Yeah.
And becoming more important. But there doesn't seem to be a place people can go that isn't kind of poisoned by, the internet. So it's all a work in progress, but that's what we're thinking.
Well, guys, thank you both very much for sharing all that news with us today and talking about your albums. Wish you all the best of luck with your new album.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you in part 2 where we get down to ask you what your final answer is.
Oh, excellent. I'm excited about that.
This interview with Sweet Billy Pilgrim is brought to you by Make a Difference with Records. We are a second-hand record and CD store based in Godalming, Surrey, supporting the mental health charity Catalyst. Check out part 2 of this audio and video podcast on the usual channels.